All right, welcome back to class. Online students, I hope I'm audible. Now, today we need to talk about Ashoka's Dhamma. Right? So, what are the questions that can be asked? First of all, what was the Ashoka's Dhamma and how did he use it as an instrument of political control? Secondly, the question may arise about the manifestation of Ashoka's Dhamma in his internal as well as external policy. Then thirdly, you may be asked that was the Dhamma simply an expression of Ashoka's belief in Buddhism? And lastly, what role did Dhamma play in the decline of the Mauryan Empire? Okay. So one by one, let us try to address each of these questions. First of all, what was the Dhamma? Batao. The word Dhamma is the Sanskrit equivalent of the word Dharma, which can have several meanings. The most prominent meaning is religion, right? But was Ashoka's Dhamma simply his belief in Buddhism or religion? No. Rather, it was the more comprehensive and evolved concept of righteousness. This was a political tool that he used in order to maintain order within society, to induce harmony within the society, to preach tolerance among his subjects, to respond to the various divisive forces that were threatening to tear his empire apart. And it was also an ideology through which he expected to establish ideological control over his subjects. Okay? How did Ashok use it as an instrument of political control? What was the process of Mauryan empire building like? Peaceful or violent? Extremely violent. The Mauryan empire had been expanded through war. From the very beginning, what was the nature of Mauryan control, state control over the lives of the subjects? Was it loose or very strong? Very strong. So in tendencies के against reaction आएगा, and what is the nature of that reaction going to be? A violent and strong reaction. Possibility of rebellions would be present. Okay? So in order to reduce that, the orientation of the state had to be changed. From a coercive state, it had to be transformed into a welfare-oriented state. Way to do that is Dhamma. Secondly, with the conquest of Kaling, the priorities of Ashok now changed. Earlier, his priority was expansion of the empire. Now his priority is consolidation of the empire. What is going to be the best strategy to do that? The conventional use of force or the use of ideology in order to convince the subject population that the ruler is one of them. पहला वाला या दूसरा वाला? दूसरा वाला, right? Because the use of violence would beget more violence, more resistance. Okay? So another way in which Ashok used the policy of Dhamma in order to enhance his political control. What was the nature of Ashoka's state? Was it a homogeneous one or a heterogeneous one? A heterogeneous one. Different people, different ethnicities, different cultures, different religions. What was the nature of the relationship between different groups, historically speaking? An extremely tense one. Conflicts, in fact, even physical conflicts were frequent. Now, this threatened the unity of his empire, right? Now, in order to diffuse this ticking time bomb, he used Dhamma in order to preach a cult of tolerance. Okay? Further, Ashok also realized that if he used the policy of Dhamma in order to consolidate his empire and in order to maintain friendly relations with his foreign with the foreign kings, then he would be able to introduce political stability, which was the basic requirement of the state. The Mauryan Empire had already reached the peak of its territorial expansion. There were no more lands left to be conquered. And in this scenario, if military expenditure would increase, what would happen? The state income would not be able to keep pace with it. There would be a financial mismatch. Therefore, there was a political need to reduce the reliance upon the military. Thus, this push towards pacifism and non-violence. These are the ways in which Ashok used Dhamma in order to maintain political control. Clear hai? Further, Dhamma, what kind of a concept is it? Is it a secular concept or a spiritual concept? A spiritual concept. Through this, Ashok was registering his claim over the spiritual realm, thus unifying both the material as well as spiritual elements of kingship under his throne. Okay? Once again, he was trying to enhance his royal despotism. Through Dhamma, in which position did he try to place himself with respect to his subjects? As their parent, as their father. So once again, paternalism was one of the objectives of Dhamma, through which Ashok wanted to portray himself as the protector as well as the discipliner of the ordinary subject population. Once again, to enhance political control. Okay? So this is how it was to be used as an instrument of political control. Write down. The word Dhamma, the word Dhamma comes from the Sanskrit word Dharma. Which may mean religion or righteousness or righteousness. Full stop. Next point. Ashoka's Dhamma stood for the latter. Latter matlab righteousness. Okay? Full stop. It was a social code of conduct. Prescribed by the ruler for his subjects in order to bring about harmony, peace, stability, tolerance, and order in the society. Full stop. Next point. Through this code of conduct, Ashoka desired to reduce the scope of conflict. Full stop. Next point. This social code was advisory and instructive in nature. Full stop. Ashoka never meant for it to be rigidly imposed upon his subjects. Since forcible enforcement क्या करता है ये? It would have produced a negative hostile reaction and thus defeated the very purpose of propounding the Dhamma. Since forcible enforcement would have defeated the very purpose of Dhamma, by eliciting resistance and rebellion. Full stop. Next point. Dhamma was also the ideology through which Ashok expressed his welfare attitude and paternalism towards his subjects. Thus ingratiating them to himself, so that they would be perpetually grateful to the king. ठीक है? Next लिखो. The contents of the Dhamma are known to us through Ashoka's edicts. They include non-violence, including non-injury, to animals. Non-violence, including non-injury to animals. Next. Mutual respect and tolerance towards all religious sects. Next. Equal respect for Brahmins and Shramanas. Equal respect for Brahmins and Shramanas. Next. Respect towards teachers and elders. Kindness towards children and slaves. And love towards neighbors. Love towards neighbors. ठीक है? So, do these reflect the values of any particular religion or all religions? All religions. So write down. These were universal values. Next main point लिख सकते हो. These were universal values. These were universal values through which Ashok wanted to bring about social order, comma, prevent conflict, and cement together the diverse and divided society into one. Full stop. ठीक है? Now, as to the question, how did he use it as a political instrument? Write down. Dhamma was also shaped by Ashoka's political objectives. Full stop. Next point. With the conquest of Kaling, comma, Mauryan territorial expansion was complete. Mauryan territorial expansion was complete. And now the need was consolidation. Full stop. सब पॉइंट लिखो. Mauryan political expansion and control had been extremely violent, leaving large sections of the subject population, large sections of the subject population traumatized and resentful. Large sections of the subject population traumatized and resentful. Full stop. Dhamma was meant to act as the balm to heal their psychological wounds and make Mauryan rule heal their psychological wounds and make Mauryan rule more humane, benevolent and palatable. Full stop. Next main point. By reducing the possibility of rebellion, Ashok was also trying to fulfill another important goal. Full stop. Namely, the reduction of military expenditure. सब पॉइंट लिखो. After Kalinga's conquest, no further territorial expansion occurred. And state income stagnated. Why? What was the biggest source of state revenue, state income? Agriculture से land revenue. ठीक है. No more territory was being annexed, therefore no more land revenue could be collected. So state income started to stagnate. Next subpoint. In such a scenario, frequent revolts would have necessitated higher military expenditure that could have destabilized the government. That could have destabilized the government. Full stop. Dhamma, comma, by shielding the state from frequent rebellions, thus played an important role in economic discipline and political consolidation ठीक है. नेक्स्ट मेन पॉइंट लिखो. थ्रू द धम्मा comma, Ashok wanted to provide the basis for peace, harmony, stability, and order what are all these ingredients of? These are all the basic ingredients of economic growth and prosperity. So write down. These are the basic ingredients or basic prerequisites for economic prosperity. And if the people, these are the basic prerequisites for economic prosperity. And if the people are wealthy, prosperous, are they more or less likely to rebel? Less likely to rebel. Levels of satisfaction are going to be higher. सड़क पे कौन उतरता है, रईस आदमी या गरीब आदमी? गरीब आदमी ज्यादा उतरता है. So that is the idea over here. Write down sub point. Thus through Dhamma, Ashok wanted to ensure high levels of economic satisfaction, which would definitely enhance political control. ठीक है. So this is what Dhamma meant, and this is how Ashok meant to use it as a political instrument. Next question क्या था? हाँ. So manifestation of Dhamma in Ashoka's internal and external policy. So first, in his internal policy, the two Kalinga edicts, what do they talk about? the rehabilitation program for the people of Kalinga. Who had been adversely affected or displaced by the Kalinga war. Okay? Similarly, the major rock edicts of Ashok inform us of the policy of building, setting up free hospitals, free kitchens, digging wells along important trade routes, and planting trees. Along important trade routes as an act of charity by the king. What are all these? These are welfare measures in order to enhance the levels of happiness in his state. ठीक है? Further, the policy of Dhamma is also visible in the advice or instructions that he gave to his own subjects. Namely, the advice not to kill animals, not to criticize or ridicule other sects, right? And what else? Some positive instructions to equally respect Brahmins and Shamanas, to treat slaves with kindness, etc. These kinds of things. ठीक है? Then, with regards to his official policy also, we see several things. For example, the appointment of a new class of officials. In the 13th year of his reign, the Dhamma Mahamatyas, in order to promote Dhamma across the empire, okay, what was to be the nature of their activities? Were they to enforce Dhamma rigidly? No, they were to use the method of persuasion rather than coercion. Okay? Further, Ashok also provided tax exemptions and concessions to people who were affected by natural calamities, war, or some other problems. Okay? Further, he also advises officials to be sensitive towards tribals, not be very harsh towards them. Okay? So this is how Dhamma manifested itself in his internal policy. Next, how did it manifest itself in his external policy? First of all, he abandoned the policy of war, that is, Bherigosh, and adopted the policy of Dhammaghosh. That is the siren of Dhamma. And with this, the very objective of his foreign policy was transformed. The mechanism of his foreign policy was transformed. He gave up the idea of Digvijay and replaced it with the idea of Dhamma Vijay. Okay, that is cultural and moral victory. Now, instead of sending Rajdutas, that is political agents and ambassadors, to the courts of foreign kings, he started sending Dhammadutas. To the courts of his contemporary rulers. We have already seen in a previous section कहाँ भेजा था इसमें. 13th Major Rock Edict informs us. ठीक है? What was the result? Of the application of Dhamma principles on his foreign policy. Do you think it was successful? Yes. In the short term, it was highly successful. With this, foreign relations became peaceful and stable. Wars stopped taking place and the frontiers of the Mauryan Empire remained stable, remained peaceful. इसका रिजल्ट क्या हुआ? Growth of trade, cultural exchange, and overall prosperity. Okay? So in the 13th Major Rock Edict, not only has Ashok talked about sending Dhammadutas to the courts of foreign rulers, but in fact securing Dhamma Vijay over them as well. Okay? However, In the long term, the policy of Dhamma Vijay proved to be a failure. Why? Immediately after Ashoka's death, the Antioch Empire, the Seleucid Empire, consolidated its own territory and started pressurizing the Indo-Greeks, who then, taking advantage of the unprepared Mauryan military, which had fallen prey to the pattern of perpetual peace, to pressurize them. Okay? So, immediately after Ashoka's death, foreign invasions would begin, which would play an important contributing role in the decline of the Mauryan Empire. Sorry. Further, in the Major Rock Edict number 7, this is believed to be the final edict inscribed by Ashok, the last one. Okay? What was Ashoka's attitude towards Dhammadutas and the idea of Dhamma Vijay? Did it have the same early enthusiasm, or was it much more disappointed in nature, pessimistic, disappointed? So Ashoka seems disappointed by the performance of Dhammadutas in the attainment of Dhamma Vijay. So in the long term, it does not seem to have been very successful. Okay? And even during the early period, the only reason why Ashok was able to maintain friendly relations with the Greek rulers was because they were busy fighting amongst themselves. Once they stopped fighting, once one of their rulers consolidated power over a vast region, then they would seek to expand in other directions. In northwestern India, they would find great interest because of India's prosperity and the unprepared Mauryan military. Okay? So even in this region, even during this period, the success of Dhamma in the external policy could not be attributed only to the virtues of Dhamma. Rather, it was the political compulsions and limitations of the Greek kingdoms of this period which allowed Dhamma to pursue the policy of peace with his neighbors. क्लियर? लिख लें इसको जल्दी से. तो लिखो, manifestation of Ashoka's Dhamma in his internal and external policy. Write down. Dhamma did not simply remain an ideal to be followed by the ordinary subjects and later rulers. Rather, it was put to practice by Ashok himself. Full stop. Next point, और सब हेडिंग दे सकते हो, इंटरनल पॉलिसी. In his domestic policy, Dhamma influenced Ashoka's paternalism, welfareism, tolerance, and universalism. And universalism. Full stop. सब पॉइंट्स में लिखो ए बी सी डी करके. ए, the Kalinga edicts talk about the rehabilitative program for the people of Kalinga affected by war. For the people of Kalinga affected by war. Next point, B. The major rock edicts also give details about acts of royal charity, such as establishing free hospitals and kitchens, and planting trees and digging wells, along important trade routes. Full stop. C लिखो. Similarly, Ashoka's instructions to his subjects, including not killing animals, not ridiculing other sects, showing equal respect to Shramans and Brahmins, and kindness towards slaves, reflect the mind of a ruler, reflect the mind of a ruler who was concerned about the welfare as well as moral well-being of his subjects. ठीक है. D right. D. His official acts such as the appointment of Dhamma Mahamatyas, giving tax exemptions, such as appointment of Dhamma Mahamatyas, giving tax exemptions and concessions, and advising officials to be sensitive towards tribals is also a reflection of his Dhamma, of his Dhamma. Okay. Next subheading, external policy. External policy. लिखो, Ashok used Dhamma in order to prepare an entirely new basis of foreign relations based on cooperation and mutual respect rather than competition, conflict, and conquest. Full stop. Subpoint. He abandoned the policy of war that is Bheri Ghosh. And adopted the policy of Dhamma Ghosh. That is victory over hearts and minds. Stop. Next subpoint लिखो. The very objective of foreign relations was changed from Digvijay, within brackets, world conquest, to Dhamma Vijay, within brackets, moral and cultural conquest. Full stop. Next point. Main point. According to the 13th Major Rock Edict, MRE 13, Ashok sent Dhamma Dutas to several foreign courts. Next main point लिखो. It further informs us that Ashok secured Dhamma Vijay in all these foreign lands. Full stop. Next subpoint लिखो. however, सब पॉइंट इसके अंदर सब पॉइंट, however, according to the seventh major rock edict, according to the seventh major rock edict, comma, Ashok was disappointed by the performance of the Dhammadutas, by the performance of the Dhammadutas, indicating that it was not as the Dhamma policy, indicating that the Dhamma Ghosh policy was not as successful in the later periods as it had been during the earlier period, as it had been during the earlier period. ठीक है, फुल स्टॉप. नेक्स्ट सब पॉइंट लिखो. In fact, one of the reasons for the early success of Dhamma Ghosh among the Greek kingdoms of Asia was the political chaos going on in this region. Full stop. Once Antiochus II consolidated control, comma, relations with the Mauryans, once Antiochus II consolidated control, comma, relations with the Mauryans began declining. Full stop. Sub point. The invasions of the Indo-Greeks started immediately after Ashoka's demise. ठीक है, ये हो गया the application of Dhamma in Ashoka's internal and external policy. What is the next question? Whether Dhamma simply represented the expression of Ashoka's belief in Buddhism or not. ठीक है, so यहाँ पे कुछ पुराने historians हैं such as R.G. भंडारकर and others, ये क्या point out करते हैं that Ashoka's belief in Buddhism was the same as the principle of Dhamma because the two of them share several core similarities. Further, Ashoka was not only propagating the Dhamma but even Buddhism. In fact, he says that the Dhamma Mahamatyas acted as the common link between Dhamma and Buddhism. How? In the name of popularizing Dhamma, what were they actually doing? Preaching Buddhism to the ordinary subject. So they were carrying out a religious conversion, and this intrusion of the state in the religious matters of the subjects led to a strong reaction, which was responsible for the decline of the Mauryan Empire. Ultimately, this reaction would be strongest among which section? Brahmins. So a strong Brahminical reaction resulting in the assassination of the last Mauryan ruler Brihadrath by his Brahmin commander-in-chief. However, there are powerful counter arguments to be made as well, namely that Dhamma was not based primarily on Buddhist principles, rather, it was drawn from various streams and its principles were universal in nature. Secondly, yes, it is true that some elements were borrowed from Buddhism, for example, the insistence upon non violence. But in Ashoka's reign, he also borrowed heavily from Brahmanism, including the policy of coercive control over the subject population. Right? Thirdly, Ashok was searching for a solution to the practical problems of his state. Therefore, he took practical solutions from all the prevalent religious ideologies. Since Buddhism had also tried to do the same thing in the context of the Mahajanpat period, therefore Buddhism से ज़्यादा चीजें draw करेगा. That was natural. ठीक है? These are the counter arguments that have been given. Write this down. लिखो. Was Buddhism simply an expression of, was Dhamma simply an expression of Ashoka's belief in Buddhism? Ashoka's belief in Buddhism. Simply an expression of Ashoka's belief in Buddhism. Write down. Some scholars, such as R.G. Bhandarkar, have highlighted the similarities between Dhamma and Buddhism. Dhamma and Buddhism, to argue that both were interchangeable. Full stop. सब पॉइंट और इसी में कंटिन्यू करो. These include सब पॉइंट्स में ए बी सी डी करके लिखो. ए, emphasis upon non-violence. This is common in both. ठीक है? Emphasis upon non-violence. B, non-recognition of the supremacy of Brahmins. Non-recognition of the supremacy of Brahmins. How does Dhamma do this? It gives equal status to Brahmins and Shramanas. ठीक है? श्रमणाज श्रमण का मतलब होता है somebody who is making effort, श्रम कर रहा है. तो श्रम कौन कर रहा है? That who has renounced his worldly life and is making efforts to attain spiritual nourishment. So जो ascetics होते थे उनको श्रमणास बोल दिया जाता था. They could be Jain also, they could be Buddhist also, they could be Ajivikas also. लोकायत सेक्ट के भी हो सकते थे, अलग अलग सेक्ट्स के हो सकते हैं. लेकिन ब्राह्मण में जो रिनंसिएंट्स होते थे, देवर, और ब्राह्मणिज्म में जो रिनंसिएंट्स होते थे, दे वर नॉट कॉल्ड श्रमणास, दे वर कॉल्ड सन्यासीज. ठीक है? सो अलग अलग क्लासेस हैं ऑफ रिनंसिएंट्स, श्रमणास एंड सन्यासीज. जो हेटेरोडॉक्स सेक्ट्स को बिलोंग करेंगे श्रमणास, ऑर्थोडॉक्स वाले सन्यासीज. ठीक है? सो हियर Dhamma has given equal status to Brahmins as well as Shramanas, thus rejecting the supremacy of Brahmins. Next, C. लिखो. Tolerance towards Shudras and slaves. Tolerance towards Shudras and slaves. ठीक है? Next main point लिखो. Apart from this, these historians have also pointed towards the specific content in Ashokan edicts which proves that he was concerned about promoting Buddhism as a matter of state policy. Example, ABC करके लिख लो. Example, पहला, in the Rumindei pillar inscription, Ashok talks about the supremacy of the three jewels of Buddhism. What were these? Buddha, Dhamma and Sangha. Of the three jewels of Buddhism. Full stop. That is Buddha, Dhamma and Sangha. ठीक है? नेक्स्ट एग्जाम्पल, अगला सब पॉइंट बी करके लिख लो. In the third minor rock edict at Bhabru, he advises that even lay people should read 6 Buddhist works. Right? And इस तरह से कई सारे हैं. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, In the Schism Edicts, he appears to be concerned about discipline and unity within the Sangha. He wants to preserve it at all costs, etc. Okay. Next लिखो. Give the subheading. Counter arguments. Counter arguments. लिखो. The principles of Dhamma. The principles of Dhamma were not taken from any single religion. Rather, they were universal in nature. Full stop. Similar thoughts could be found in Jain as well as Upanishadic philosophy. ठीक है. नेक्स्ट लिखो. while Dhamma borrowed the ideas of non-violence and tolerance from Buddhism, comma, Ashoka took coercive state control from Brahmanism. Full stop. Next लिखो. Ashok wanted an ideological tool to enhance state control by reducing conflict and the Buddhist principles were uniquely suited to attain this. ठीक है. Thus the imprints of Buddhism can naturally be found in Dhamma. Next लिखो. Ashok was looking for a way to diffuse the religious tension prevalent in his empire. Full stop. Prevalent in his empire. Full stop. Unlike Buddhism, that was spread by preaching and proselytization. Comma. Ashok, preaching and proselytization, जगह जगह पर जाना, right? And preach करना लोगों को, proselytization, propagating the message, preaching and proselytization. Ashok never tried to do this with Dhamma, since it would have been counterproductive. ठीक है, नेक्स्ट पैराग्राफ लिखो. इन कंक्लूजन, comma, it is safe to say that while Ashoka's Dhamma borrowed some ideas from Buddhism, comma, in no way was it an extension of Buddhism. In no way was it an extension of Buddhism. Full stop. In fact, unlike Buddhism that was a religion, comma, Dhamma was an enlightened, unlike Buddhism that which was a religion, Dhamma was an enlightened political ideology and philosophy to enhance control, reduce conflict, ensure peace and stability. ठीक है, so this was whether Dhamma was simply an extension of Buddhism or not. And finally we come to the question, kya? How far was Dhamma responsible in the decline of the Mauryan Empire? ठीक है. Now, on the one hand, a group of scholars, जो Hindu nationalist scholars such as R.G. Bhandarkar, etc., they point out that Dhamma played a major role in the decline of the Mauryan Empire. कैसे? By inducing pacifism. ठीक है? So the objective of Dhamma was to make the society more peaceful, to reduce conflict and even external war. ठीक है? So through this policy of pacifism, what would happen to the military? It would become underfunded and underprepared. This would lead to military weakness, right? And since the Mauryan Empire was a war state created through war, therefore military weakness would spell the doom for it. Okay? Secondly, due to Dhamma, what happened to the welfare and social expenditure of the state? Would that reduce or increase? Increase. Welfare expenditure would increase. And what would be the result? The state would start to scavenge resources, cannibalize resources of other critical sectors such as military and bureaucracy. So, the bureaucratic and military budget would be slashed. And the bureaucracy and military were what? The most important instruments of state control. And as a result, state control as a whole would weaken. Okay? Further, the argument that Ashok never wanted to propagate the Dhamma is misleading, because how else do we explain the exhaustive powers he gave to the Dhamma Mahamatyas? In fact, the powers of administering justice in certain cases were transferred to them. And how did the Dhamma Mahamatyas use this power? They became overbearing and overzealous, not only in enforcing Dhamma, but also using their power in a corrupt manner to spread Buddhism. Okay? So their role became intrusive and oppressive. What is this going to lead to? A negative reaction from the people, right? Especially Brahmins. Okay? Further, what did Dhamma become to the successors of Ashok? Many of them may have wanted to go back to the original pattern of statecraft based on the arthashastra. But could they do that? No. Why? Because in the eyes of the subject population, they would lose legitimacy. Okay? So for Ashoka's successors, Dhamma became a burdensome legacy. They would have to keep expanding welfare expenditure, keep reducing military and bureaucratic expenditure. So none of Ashoka's successors had a realistic chance because of Dhamma to right the ship, to set the right course. Clear hai? Should Dhamma be the only policy that should be blamed for the decline of the Mauryan Empire though? No. Therefore, the role of Dhamma must be perceived in the broader context of other factors as well. Okay? Further, there are also some counter arguments. What kind of a ruler would you assess Ashok to be? An idealistic and impractical ruler or a highly practical ruler? a highly practical ruler. When he would say non-violence, would he mean absolute non-violence at any cost? Would he disband his military? Would he let rebels go unpunished? Would he allow law and order to crumble? No, ये सब नहीं होने देगा, right? So the allegation of pacifism over here becomes weaker due to this. Okay. Secondly, what was the purpose of Dhamma? To reduce conflict in society. If Dhamma was to be forcibly enforced, would it result in the reduction of conflict or increase of conflict? Increase of conflict. So it had to be voluntarily accepted. And the task of the Dhamma Mahamatyas was never to enforce Dhamma or impose Dhamma, but only to oversee its propagation, its popularization through the method of persuasion rather than coercion. Okay? And thirdly, as far as the allegation of Dhamma being responsible for a prominent Brahmanical reaction is concerned, so simple question is, who introduced the policy of Dhamma? Was it Brihadrath or Ashok? Ashok. So why no Brahmanical reaction against him? Why was it Brihadrath who was assassinated? Okay. So why did it manifest only 50 years later? And secondly, that its entire the Brahmanical reaction has been reinterpreted in a new light, right? Assassination of Brihadrath has now been seen in the light of a military coup rather than a Brahmanical reaction. Why? Why military coup? Why would the military be dissatisfied with the Mauryans? Because of rising military weakness, because of lower budgets, and because of the encroachment of the Indo-Greeks on the northwestern frontier. So prominent military officials would be highly disenchanted, and thus they assassinated Brihadrath in broad daylight in public. ठीक है, लिख लें इसको. So give the heading, role of Dhamma in the decline of the Mauryan Empire. Role of Dhamma in the decline of the Mauryan Empire. Write down. According to R.G. Bhandarkar, according to R.G. Bhandarkar, comma, the policy of Dhamma induced pacifism by reducing the scope of internal and external conflict. Stop. External conflict. Full stop. Subpoint. This harmed the military readiness of the Mauryan Empire, which was essentially a war state. and thus it was unable to ensure its survival. Its survival. Thus it was unable to ensure its survival. Next point लिखो. Next main point. Welfare expenditure. Welfare expenditure ballooned as a result of the Dhamma policy. Ballooned as a result of the Dhamma policy, resulting in a reduction in the administrative and military budget. Full stop. With this, the two chief instruments of state control, were irreparably damaged. State control, two chief instruments of state control were irreparably damaged. अगला लिखो, next main point. With time, comma, the Dhamma Mahamatyas who enjoyed extraordinary judicial powers became more and more overbearing and intrusive. Thus eliciting resentment among certain sections, which would later cause the decline of the Mauryan Empire. Next point, main point. For Ashoka's successors, comma, the Dhamma policy became a burdensome legacy that none of them were able to escape. Became a burdensome legacy that none of them were able to escape. Full stop. None of them were able to escape. Therefore, realistically, they never had a chance to arrest the steep decline that the empire found itself in after Ashoka's death. after Ashoka's death. ठीक है, तो ये हो गया Ashoka's policy of Dhamma. Now, give me a minute. I'll be right back, and we'll talk about the reasons for the decline of the Mauryan Empire. Right. So the decline of the Mauryan Empire. What were the factors responsible? So over here, we can point out two different sets of factors. क्या? Factors of a general character. That are responsible for the decline of all major powers in Indian history. And factors which are specific to the process of Mauryan decline. Okay. Now, when we are talking about the general factors, what are the things that we can point out? What were the factors? First of all, the tendency of localization. मतलब, when the Mauryan Empire was expanded, much of its territory came under the peripheral zone. Were these economically highly productive regions? No, these were underproductive regions, right? However, the state, through its inputs, transformed them into economically productive regions, right? So earlier over here, there existed pre-state polities where, because of economic shortage, independent state formation was not possible. Now these regions have become resource surplus, trade centers have also emerged, production is also taking place natively, and they are trading, they are connected to the economy of the rest of the empire, which is humongous, and also because of the Mauryan connectivity to the external world, to the global economy. Therefore, these are going to become politically self-sufficient, politically independent. जो यहाँ पे regional elites हैं, would they want to continue under the control of the center, or would they try to break away from it? Why? Because center expects some things in return. क्या चाहिए उसको? Taxes चाहिए, labor चाहिए, resources चाहिए. The elites at this region, in the peripheral regions, want to keep all these resources, appropriate them for themselves, right? So there is a strong tendency of localization in all such empires. एक फैक्टर तो ये है, right? Secondly, rising military expenditure is another problem. How? देखो, once again the empire consisted of a very large, economically underproductive peripheral zone. The state would try to transform it through important inputs into productive regions, right? One of the basic ways to do this, to achieve this, is providing security and stability in these regions. तो यहाँ पे strong military presence maintain करना जरूरी रहेगा. But are the fruits of this of this political stability going to become apparent immediately, or will there be a long gestation period? Long gestation period, there is going to be a very long delay. So between the point or time of investment and the time of return, the period is extremely long. and this delay is going to result in financial strain, financial stress. The empire is going to start crumbling from within. So rising military expenditure is also going to be a factor. Further, weak successors are also going to play an important role. How? What was the nature of the state? A highly centralized one. Over here, what were the qualities that were required in a good ruler? He should be a good administrator, he should be a good general, he should be well versed in law, he should be well versed in economics, he should be well versed in philosophy, he should have a good working knowledge of the different cultures that survive, that exist within the empire, right? If he was not having all these qualities, what would happen then? He would become dependent upon his advisors and ministers, right? Since the empire was extremely large and performed several functions, there was a large number of advisors and ministers, right? Now, as the position or as the control of the ruler over his cabinet weakened, what would happen? Many ambitious ministers are going to permanently entrench themselves, right? And this is going to result in resentment amongst other ministers who are now going to enter into a direct competition between them. इसका result क्या होगा? Groups are going to emerge within the court, right? They are going to continuously fight against each other. Sometimes this would result in political loss and warfare as well. Some other times it would result in trying to exert their influence upon the king. तो किंग को पपेट बनाने की कोशिश करेंगे, right? Sometimes those who are unsuccessful might try to assassinate the ruler and replace him with their candidate also, right? So weak successors की वजह से भी the such empires decline. The same would happen with the Gupta Empire also, Mauryan Empire also, and later the Mughal Empire also. Clear? Write down. Decline of the Mauryan Empire, इसमें लिखो. It may be attributed to two sets of factors. Number 1 and 2. One, general factors which were responsible for the decline of all empires, and two, factors which specifically influenced the Mauryan Empire. Subheading though, general factors. Under that, write number 1 for A, tendency of centralization. Write down. The Mauryan Empire consisted of many regions which were in the initial stages of state formation or were pre-state polities. In the initial stages of state formation or incipient stages of state formation or pre-state polities. pre-state polities. सब पॉइंट लिखो. Their resource capacity was insufficient to sustain an independent state. With a developed bureaucracy, military, and tax regime. Military and tax regime. Full stop. Next point. The Mauryans, by encouraging economic expansion, made these regions self-sufficient. And thus, there was a natural tendency among the local elite to assert autonomy from the center. To assert autonomy from the center. Okay. नेक्स्ट लिखो नंबर 2. टेंडेंसी ऑफ सेंट्रलाइजेशन हो गया. नंबर 2 लिखो. राइजिंग मिलिट्री एक्सपेंडिचर. Write down. The Mauryan Empire consisted of a large peripheral zone that wasn't very economically valuable, but required constant military protection. Subpoint. This created an element of, इस लाइन को काट दो. लिखो. This resulted in inefficient resource allocation. Ultimately leading to financial decay. Next लिखो. Number 3. Weak successors. Ashoka was followed by weak rulers who were incapable of making the necessary changes to arrest the process of decline. To arrest the process of decline. Full stop. They lost control over their ministers, who gradually carved out individual spheres of influence within the government, individual spheres of influence within the government. Spheres of influence within the central government. Full stop. Royal authority broke down. Royal authority broke down, and different ministers formed groups competing against each other. Full stop. This factionalism ultimately led to rapid decline. ठीक है? Then second subheading लिखो, specific factors. Now, how was the decline of the Mauryan Empire different from the decline of other Indian empires? Other Indian empires, for example, Mughal Empire or Gupta Empire or the Delhi Sultanate, how would you characterize their decline? As a sudden process or a gradual process? Gradual, long drawn process. And in the case of the Mauryan Empire, relatively sudden. Within 50 years of Ashoka's death, the Mauryan Empire was no longer on the map itself. Okay? So what explains this sudden decline? These specific factors. Write down. A unique feature of Mauryan decline was its sudden collapse. Full stop. Sub point लिखो. Therefore, historians have ascribed some specific factors to explain this collapse. What was the Mauryan policy of resource expansion? कैसे करना चाहते थे? Either by conquest or by agrarian expansion. अग्रेरियन एक्सपेंशन के थ्रू. ठीक है? तो कॉन्क्वेस्ट में क्या चाहिए होगा? बहुत सारा पैसा चाहिए होगा, मिलिट्री चाहिए होगा. सो दिस represented a major military expenditure, and agrarian expansion को करने के लिए a lot of rehabilitation, resettlement would have to be done, clearing of forests would have to be done, provision of inputs would have to be done. So a great financial outlay would have to be made, right? What would be the time period before this financial investment could be recovered? Short period or extremely long period? Extremely long period, maybe more than a generation. ठीक है, तो 20-30 साल लग जाएंगे before these regions became economically viable, before the losses or the expenditure incurred from this military expeditions could be justified, could be recovered. ठीक है, and this delay delayed returns caused a mismatch in state finances. ठीक है, so the Mauryan Empire was always catching up. Its expenditures were always more than the income, even though its income was quite substantial. Clear hai? Write down. The Mauryan policy, हमें इसके अंदर नंबर 1 पहला वाला, the Mauryan policy of resource expansion entailed conquest and agrarian expansion, which required huge financial expenditure and delayed returns, and gave delayed returns, which required huge financial expenditure and gave delayed returns. Full stop. This resulted in a perpetual mismatch between income and expenditure, And how to overcome this mismatch? By looking to conquer new lands or to expand agriculture even in more virgin territory. Okay? So, but what would that entail? Even more expenditure. So the gap would go on progressively widening. ठीक है, इसको ये वापस कभी नहीं ला पाएंगे. Okay. Next specific factor was the over centralized nature of the Mauryan Empire. Right? इसकी वजह से भी कुछ यूनिक प्रॉब्लम्स क्रिएट होंगी. What was the nature of the Mauryan bureaucracy? Was extremely large. Why? Because all the functions had to be performed by the state through bureaucrats, है ना? And bureaucracy में रूल क्या होता है हमेशा? It tries to maximize its budget, right? So every department would want the maximum share of the budget. And how to justify that? Why would the bureaucrats or a particular department want more budget? Because they would claim कि हमें काम और ज्यादा करना है, right? And this would lead to a role maximization also. So as the state matured, both the budget as well as the responsibilities of the state kept on increasing, whereas the efficiency of the bureaucracy kept on declining, right? Result क्या होगा? The state would have to invest much more to get lesser and lesser returns. Once again, what is going to happen? Economic mismatch. Expenditure is going to outstrip revenue. Clear? Write down. The over centralization of the Mauryan state created some unique problems. Due to the nature of the state, comma. The Mauryan bureaucracy was extremely large and was permanently seeking to maximize its role as well as budget. Perpetually maximize its role as well as budget. Sub point लिखो. This required further expenditure but gradually the state experienced progressive resource shortage. Why? The expansion of the Mauryan territory stopped with the conquest of Kalinga. So through conquest, new territory could not be conquered, and agrarian expansion is going to become more and more expensive due to rising inefficiency within the bureaucracy. Write down. The resource expansion stagnated. Resource expansion stagnated and became less and less efficient. Full stop. As a result, the over-centralized bureaucratic machinery became unsustainable. ठीक है? And then finally, the role of Ashoka or role of Dhamma. So he was another factor. Clear? Now this we have already covered. तो उसको यहाँ पे केवल copy paste करने की जरूरत है. So on the whole, what can we say? That Mauryan Empire was or declined due to the ordinary factors which are responsible for the decline of all great Indian powers. But the sudden nature of its decline can be explained by the factors which are specific to the Mauryans, namely its unique policy of resource expansion, the over-centralized nature of its administration, and the role played by Ashoka or Dhamma in accelerating the Mauryan decline. Clear? Take down a question. Likho. Examine the factors responsible for the Mauryan decline. Full stop. Mauryan decline. Full stop. How can the almost sudden collapse of the Mauryan Empire be explained? How can the almost sudden collapse of the Mauryan Empire be explained? question mark. 200 words, 15 marks. Okay. So with this, we have covered all the important sections of the Mauryan age. कल की क्लास में post Mauryan age शुरू करते हैं. ठीक है? Any doubts? All right then. Thank you for your time. I'll see you guys tomorrow.